This morning, when you ate breakfast, you probably didn't think about it at all. You picked up your fork, you took a bite. Maybe you were looking at your phone. But if your ancestors sat in front of that same plate, they might not have eaten it at all, because your sense of taste is the product of an inheritance far older than you think. The human brain loves sweetness, but that love isn't an accident. 2 million years ago, your ancestor was searching for fruit in the forest. A ripe fruit meant sugar. Sugar meant energy. Energy meant survival. That's why the brain learned to say yes to sugar, so it wouldn't die. What about bitter tastes? Why do you avoid them? Because in nature, bitterness usually meant a warning. It could mean poison. Plants protected themselves from being eaten this way. Your ancestor only had to learn that lesson once. The cost of forgetting could be death. If you don't like broccoli today, there's a reason for that. That bitter edge is still triggering an ancient alarm inside your brain. Now let's get to the real question. Were ancient human meals actually tasty? The answer is more complicated than you'd expect. Archaeologist Amanda Henry examined tartar on Neanderthal teeth in 2011. What she found was surprising: traces of cooked plant starch. Neanderthals weren't just eating meat, they were cooking root vegetables, grains, even date-like plants. Fire didn't just make food safe, it made food taste better. Because cooking changes the chemistry of food. Heat breaks down starch into sugar. Protein caramelizes. That's why a roasted root vegetable tastes far sweeter than a raw one. Harvard anthropologist Richard Wrangham argued this was one of humanity's biggest turning points. According to him, cooking with fire didn't just fill stomachs, it grew brains. Cooked food is easier to digest. The body spends less energy digesting it. Where do you think that saved energy went? Straight to the brain. That's exactly what Wrangham's cooking hypothesis claims. So, in a way, the first tasty meal is the very reason you exist today. But not everything was this pleasant. Ancient humans sometimes had to eat the same thing for months at a time. When winter came, there was no fruit. There were no vegetables. What remained was dried meat, bone marrow, and whatever fat they could find. By today's standards, that diet would feel monotonous, even unbearable. So why weren't they complaining? Because they had nothing to compare it to. A meal you'd call boring today was for them a celebration of survival. They say hunger is the best spice. For ancient humans, this was literally true. Caloric scarcity was so common that their bodies evolved to reward fat and sugar generously. The instant joy you feel from a slice of cake today is actually a survival strategy thousands of years old. Now let's go back even further. To the time before fire. Some early human ancestors hadn't yet learned to control fire. What were they eating then? Raw meat, raw plants, sometimes carrion. Archaeological evidence shows early Homo species extracting bone marrow from animal carcasses. This was a meal that wore down your teeth, one that could take hours to chew. Hand that meal to a modern person, and they probably couldn't finish a single bite. But for a person of that era, marrow was pure energy. Perhaps the tastiest thing there was. Because taste isn't an absolute concept. It shifts depending on context. When you're hungry, everything tastes better. When you're full, even the finest meal feels ordinary. This is an evolutionary trick. Your brain built a reward system to keep you alive. Now let's look at geography. Because not every ancient community ate the same thing. Communities living near coastlines relied on fish and seafood. A 2018 study showed that coastal Homo sapiens communities had diets rich in omega-3 fatty acids. This was a factor that supported brain development. Those living inland depended on large game animals, mammoths, bison. Hunting a mammoth could take weeks. But if successful, that meat could feed a village for months. Think about it. A single hunt could determine the fate of an entire winter. Your ability to walk into a store today and find everything you need is a privilege belonging to a tiny sliver of history. What about salt? That white powder you casually sprinkle on every meal today was once worth as much as gold in the ancient world. Some communities fought wars over salt, built entire trade routes around it. Because salt didn't just add flavor, It was the only way to preserve meat from spoiling. So the taste of an ancient meal wasn't shaped by the palate alone. It was shaped by the need to survive. Now let's run a small experiment in your mind. Imagine you stepped into a time machine and sat down by a fire 10,000 years ago. Someone hands you a roasted root vegetable, smoky, slightly charred, unsalted. On the first bite, you'd probably be disappointed. It would taste ordinary to you. But if you hadn't eaten that same meal in days, that same bite would feel incredible because your sense of taste is calibrated to your current standards. Today, fast food constantly stimulates your brain with processed sugar, heavy salt, and dense fat. This creates a level of taste intensity your ancestors never encountered. A team of neuroscientists published findings in 2013 showing that processed foods trigger the brain's reward center far more powerfully than natural foods do. So, objectively speaking, a bag of chips you eat today might be tastier than your ancestors' most special feast, by the brain's own measure. But that's not a victory, that's a vulnerability, because your brain was designed to seek out a taste that was rare in nature. Now that taste is on every corner, and your body still reacts as if scarcity is coming. It stores. It hoards. That's why one of today's biggest health problems is actually an ancient survival strategy misfiring in the wrong era. So, was ancient food really tasteless? No. It was simply a different world of flavor. Fewer varieties, but every bite carried far more weight. Every meal was the reward of a hunt, a search, sometimes weeks of labor. Maybe what we've lost today isn't flavor. It's the feeling of earning that flavor. Tonight, when you eat something, pause for a moment. Put your fork down on the table and think. This bite is the final stop of a 2 million-year journey, and maybe the ordinary meal you eat without a second thought is a feast your ancestors couldn't have even dreamed of. Hey, if you made it this far, thank you, genuinely. If something's on your mind, or you've got a question, or you just want to say something to me, drop it in the comments. I promise, I read every single one. Your thoughts, your ideas, even your criticism actually matter to me. See you in the next video. Take care of yourself.